All right, well, welcome everyone to Elevate Lane County's Working Wednesday webinars. My name is Lizzie Gray and I'm the project coordinator for Connected Lane County. And I am joined today by Cassia Gaelic, and she will be talking to us about resume building. Cassia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much. So as Lizzie said, I'm Cassia. I'm the Assistant Director of Admission at Northwest Christian University, and I'm excited to share with you a little bit about building a resume, which we really just see as telling your story. You get to share with people who you are. So that's what I'm going to tackle today.
That's great. So while Cassia leads us through this webinar, please go ahead and type in any questions that you have for her. There will be time when she finishes for me to ask her those questions. So don't hold back, send them all in because we'll have plenty of time. All righty, go for it.
Without further ado, let's work on screen sharing. Okay, so.
There we go.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, so we are Northwest Christian University. Before I get started on the actual resume building portion, I'm going to do a brief announcement because you're actually going to see after July 1st of this year, we are going to be Bushnell University. So I just wanted to make sure if any of you are going to be referencing this in the future that you know that we are one and the same. So in celebration of 125 years of existence, we are changing our name to Bushnell University in celebration of our roots. And there is a lot more information on our website, so I won't take any time to tackle that. But I want to let you know that the content for this presentation is actually provided by our Office of Career Development. We work with all of our college students on building their resume to be the strongest possible as they're looking for their future careers. So I just wanted to make sure that you all know Angela Doty, our Director of Career Development, was instrumental in providing all of the content for this presentation. I just get to help deliver it.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's tackle what is a resume. It is a self-marketing tool. You're going to use it to summarize your education, your qualifications, your experiences, and your accomplishments. You'll oftentimes see these resumes are targeted to specific jobs, but right now if you're just starting out and truly building it from scratch, we'll cover what all the main sections are. But really, when you are applying for a job, your resume should be catered to the job that you're applying to. So keep that in mind that you want to do a targeted resume for each job that you're applying for. You want to use action words to describe your experiences and also who you are. You're going to qualify as well as quantify your accomplishments. And as I already mentioned, you're telling your story. Your resume is a brief synopsis of who you are. And so you want to make sure that it's something that really just shouts who you are. Okay. So we're going to start with a basic resume layout. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to take out a piece of paper and write some notes. As I'm talking, you might just have thoughts that come in that really resonate with who you are and what you've accomplished. So I want to make sure that you have that. We're going to start with just a basic layout. Your resume has a header. It needs to have your basic contact information. You're going to have an objective or a profile. This is optional, but in the example I show you, you'll see how it helps you really specify which job you're applying for. It'll have your education. It's going to have your experience, and this is paid as well as unpaid. We're also going to highlight specific skills that you have, as well as we'll cover just some optional sections that might enhance your resume if you're feeling like you have information to include, but you don't know where to include it. So this is just a very basic example of a resume. I realize it's small. I'll show little highlights of it as we go through, but I want you to see that it's one page. You can easily identify the name at the top. So you're going to make sure, okay, someone who looks at this resume is going to be able to see that your name is Jane in this example. So easy to identify who the person is. You can see up at the top, there's contact information. And as I was just talking about, you're going through the profile section, the education section. This one is more geared toward professional experience. But as you're in high school, we're going to just talk about experience in general, the paid as well as unpaid. And then we're going to go down to special skills and other optional sections such as references. We want to make sure that we include everything that really highlights who you are, that you want the person who's reviewing your resume to know on this one-page document. Now you'll see that there's actually quite a bit of information on this one. There are small margins, but this example has clear defined sections and is fairly easy to read. So that's just one sample, but there are a lot of different ways to actually format a resume. We're going to start with just the formatting basics. I would recommend to be careful with templates. There are some really great options out there. In fact, you can start with Word or even in PowerPoint, and they have some pre-built templates on there. You can Google resume templates, but don't get too lost in all the different fun colors and formatting. Right now, you're working on just getting the nuts and bolts down. You want to figure out, okay, this is the basic resume and information that I have, and then feel free to go back and customize it and personalize it the way you want later. So we're going to talk about just the very basic formatting principles. We want you to look at one page with 1/2 inch to 1 inch margins. The example I gave you did have smaller margins because there was a lot to fit in, but note that if you're like, well, I don't know if I have all that much information to fill out one full page, the 1 inch margins are great because it still shows your overall information, but it may cushion it a little bit. So you're also going to want to use size 10 to 14 font. Make it legible. You don't want size 6 fonts and someone's really trying to look hard and read, but you also don't want a larger font just because you don't have a lot of experience or information to start with. It's pretty standard to see size 12, but depending on what information you have and the formatting you have, you could use size 10 to 14 based on headers as well as other information that you have built into your resume. Use things like underlining and use bold as well as italic fonts to highlight your important information. Just don't use all the decorative fonts, although frilly swirls, they're fun, but it's really detracting from the information, which is information about you. Again, we're not trying to focus on the font that you use, but rather the information that you're providing through the font. So underline, bold, italic, all of that works great to highlight the things that you want to, whether it's sections or really important skill sets, and we'll go over some of that later as well. You'll find that white spaces can create clear distinctions between your sections. The example I gave also had some lines denoting all the different sections. So again, it's based on your customization and what looks best with information that you have. You do want to capitalize job titles. And so we're going to go into proofreading in a minute because sometimes you read what you want to have written, but you may just need an extra set of eyes saying, actually, did you mean to use this word or did you forget to capitalize this word? Sometimes you read it so many times you think you're good, but even at the university level, I still have people proofread for me because sometimes you've read it so many times and you think you got it right. It's just great to have someone else double check. You're going to want to make sure you're emphasizing job descriptions, but don't use bullet points. So when we're looking at formatting, you do want a very clean cut format. Bullet points are acceptable in highlighting specific skill sets when you're using really succinct descriptions that aren't full sentences, but if you're doing a full description, you'll see there are places that you could put that on a resume to really highlight who you are, but you don't always want to use bullet points to emphasize those job descriptions. And as far as underlining, while it's okay for headers, you don't want to underline your email address. That's typically seen as a hyperlink where someone would click on it, but if you're handing a resume in person, hopefully one day we'll get back to that point, right, where you can actually drop off a resume in person. Well, so no one's going to click on the link if it's a piece of paper. But even when you're emailing it, it looks really crisp to not have the hyperlink if someone is just reading your email because you will have literally just emailed it to them, so they'll have that. So next, we're going to talk about using your language. You're going to want to use crisp, succinct, and descriptive language. You're going to want to use fragments and not complete sentences, so you don't want to see periods at the end of the descriptions. of each statement that you use. You're going to remove I, we, my, all of those personal pronouns that we often use to describe ourselves. And you're going to use a lot of action verbs to begin your short descriptive sentences. You want someone to really believe what you're saying. So those active verbs are going to be important. And you also want to be consistent with your tense as well as style and format. So one more reason to have someone else proofread, because you may think you have the same voice throughout the entire resume, but then someone who reads it that's not in your head goes, actually, I got something different. So it's just really helpful to have another set of eyes. But another tip is to limit your use of abbreviations. So while we are using, we'll say incomplete sentences, they're short statements, we don't want you to use a lot of abbreviations. So I know that may seem a little counterintuitive. What we're saying, keep it short, but also don't abbreviate. So we'll go through some of that. Let's start with the header section. So as I mentioned, it was in the example, easy to read the student's name. So you can see that that font was a little bit larger than the font right below it, which shows the address and contact information. So your header in the basic format, you're going to want to put your name, your address, your phone number, and your email. You want to make sure they can contact you. Now, here in the example, if you have, say, your full name, which is Catherine, but you have a preferred name of Kathy, you can actually put that on your resume. It's something where, as an employer looking to hire someone, I may review a resume. I had this plenty with my student workers that I was going to hire. They may have a preferred name, and I wouldn't know it based on their legal name. So if a student preferred to go by Kathy instead of Catherine, that may seem a little obvious, but I had several students who actually preferred to go by their middle name. And so it was nice when we were actually introducing each other. I had already known that because some had put it on their resume where they had their full name and they did have a preferred name, but that is completely up to you. Just know that if you do go by something other than your legal name that you have on your resume, people who interview you want to know that. We want to make sure we're addressing you properly. So, although interviewing is a separate talk. As far as your phone number, what is the best way to reach you? Are you giving out your mom's phone number, your home phone, or do you have a cell phone number? Just know that you want to tell your parents, if you're giving out your parents' phone number, hey, I put your phone number on my resume. You might be getting a call from so-and-so, because the worst thing is to be calling for you and then reach a parent who goes, wait, my son or daughter did what? Who is this? And you just want to give them a heads up. But it's perfectly acceptable if you don't have a cell phone number to put a different number. Just specify if it's a cell or if it's a home number, so that way it gives the person who's reading your resume a little background information. And with your email, this is something that you could do, a personal or a school email. Keep in mind what your email says about you. So if you've got like skaterchick@gmail.com, think about a more professional email. So I had those, mine was Loving Languages or something like that. I had a very descriptive personal email back when I was in high school, but then you move into this professional realm and you want your email address to also reflect you as a professional. So I encourage you to look at your full email address, as well as if you are ready to start applying for jobs or scholarships or college, consider creating one of the free email accounts that allows you to then have a very professional email that you can put on your resume. So, is it there? So let's talk about your profile. So this is the section above that I was talking about it being optional, but it really highlights and directs the person reviewing your resume as to why you're applying for the job and really what describes you. You have an opportunity here to integrate your top skills, and oftentimes a resume is telling a person about yourself and then reiterating those points in a different way. You really want to hit home your skill sets, who you are, and why you are the person for the job. Your resume is essentially saying pick me without literally writing pick me. So with integrating your skills and your personal philosophy, you can use this section to identify certain personality traits. The example I have is, organized administrator and counselor committed to providing relevant career development services and resources in the context of higher education. That may seem a little intimidating to write such a bold statement about yourself, but this is how you're saying, pick me. This is how you're saying, I stand out above the other candidates. This is why you want me, because this is what I'm going to bring to the table. And so that active voice that you have in this profile, whether it's in a summary or with the short descriptive phrases below, it really hones in on who you are and what you bring to the table. So you can see there's that description, but there's also that profile of energetic approach to work and life. Do you feel like there was energy behind the description? I mean, I do, but I also want to make sure that if you're like, that doesn't sound like me, I don't think I want to do such a descriptive summary. I think I'd rather do bullet points. Well, this is your resume, so you get to customize it the way you'd like. You get to talk about how you might be an effective communicator simply by putting a bullet point, or you might want to do a learn to description. Again, this is your resume. So as you're thinking right now of how you want to customize it, what describes you? Are you the person who gets right to the point? Is this, business style writing where you can really get to it? Or are you the type of person who loves to elaborate on things? Because this shows some of your personality as well. I just happen to like both, so I wanted to give you both examples. So an objective statement, that's also something that you can put in this profile section where you can customize it for the specific degree, the job that you're looking for. It is completely optional. It's not something that if I don't see an objective statement on a resume that I go, oh, I need to throw this out. Really, it's telling you what you want to obtain the director position at Bushnell University in order to use my skills in communication, counseling, and administration to facilitate career development in the context of higher education. That's the example I've given you. So with that objective statement, you know that I want to obtain the director position at Bushnell University. And again, this is the customization piece that I kind of talked about earlier. If you are applying for very specific jobs, this is another reason to have someone proofread, because what if I put the University of Oregon, but I was actually applying for the director position at Bushnell University? Both great schools, but it's going to be someone at Bushnell who's reading my resume and they're going to think, oh, you know what, this person didn't take the extra time to double check that they were applying for the right job. Or they'll know, oh, this person is applying for all the different director positions. They don't really want this specific job. So it's really important as you're doing things like this that are customizing your resume to make sure that before you submit it, it's been truly changed and customized for the job at hand. So with this one, let's go back to it. You know that I want to obtain the director position. You know it's for Bushnell University. And you know that my skills include communication, counseling, and then I also want to facilitate career development within higher education. So it's very specific. So if I were to say career development at the high school level, there is still some overlap between, as you see now, my work at a university and working with high school students. But again, for this job, it's having that second set of eyes that comes through and says, hey, did you mean to say high school or did you mean higher ed? Oh, okay, I did mean higher ed. But sometimes I work with high school students, so I didn't even think that it would come across incorrectly. Again, just having one more person to reread that so you're not just inside your head, someone else can see it from an objective standpoint. It's really important. But what's really important is also you're telling the person what you will give, not what you will get from being hired. So you want to tell them why you are so excited, why you are the right person, and why you want this job. That's what this objective statement is really trying to hone in on, and what that profile highlighting your specific skills is trying to hone in on. Okay, so let's talk about your education section. You are going to be finishing high school. So you're going, well, what do I include? Include your high school name. You can include your expected graduation date. You can also say anticipated graduation. If you have a 3.0 or above, absolutely highlight your GPA. However, I don't often ask people, okay, and so what was your GPA, unless I'm looking at an admissions decision. If I'm looking at a resume and I see a higher GPA, that tells me this student has really focused on their academics and has been very studious. But we also are looking at you holistically. We want to see what other experience you have. So this education section right now is just a small portion. So if you don't have above a 3.0, don't think you completely lost out. I just wouldn't include your GPA on there, and I would focus on other things that you can put on your resume. So if you are involved in any sort of honor societies, have you done any sort of capstone, title it, tell us what the content was about. Have you studied abroad? Really, your education section, it highlights how you've learned. And so if there's anything that ties it specifically into your education during your high school years, honestly, this is something your parents and your advising counselors at school might be able to help you brainstorm, because sometimes you forget the things that you've done. But believe me, I'm sure your mom remembers driving you to that, and your counselor remembers, talking to you about signing up for this class. If you've taken honors or AP advanced placement courses, those are the types of things that you can definitely highlight right now, since your high school education is a lot of what you have accomplished so far in your life. Now, when we get into experience, you're going to want to be as descriptive again as you can for your position and title, and make sure it's to what you're applying for. You can put your dates of the employment, you can do bullet points. Again, you want to do action verb statements. So I have an example: responsible for leading groups, facilitated group sessions also works. It's a little more passive, but we want to make sure that you are describing and having good examples for what your experience in high school entails. So let's go to the example. Now, this one is more specific to a professional experience. You'll see the way that this section has used all capitals to highlight the experience section. And then down below, for each different type of experience, we've used a bold font. And then you'll see the dates of that experience. And so below that, that's when you start using those bullet points to highlight what were your responsibilities in that experience. So I'm thinking back to high school. I was a part of National Honor Society my junior and senior year, but before that, I was still finding myself. I was still trying to figure out what classes I liked, what subjects I felt like were my strong suits, and I was also trying to figure out what skill sets did I have and which ones could I refine. Honestly, this is a really great exercise to do with family, friends, and your counselors, because they know you, and sometimes you need someone to actually tell you what you're good at. It wasn't until my junior year that someone said, "Did you know you're good at public speaking?" And I said, "Well, isn't everyone?" Apparently not everyone likes to do any sort of public speaking, but I tended to do well. Now, does it mean that I'm the best? No, but it's still an experience, and it's still a skill that I have that I could hone in on for my resume. So I could talk about how in National Honor Society, I gave an address to our whole chapter. I can talk about how I organized different projects for our group. So while that's one experience, I also played soccer. So what sort of experience could I draw from that? Again, this is where you have those dialogues with your mentors, teachers, counselors, and parents, and say, okay, what types of skills can you see from my experience in something like soccer? Well, I had to maintain an organized schedule. I had to learn how to prioritize, because I knew when soccer practice was, so it meant that I couldn't be at home. I couldn't be hanging out with my friends. It meant that I needed to have a good, timely nature, and it meant that I worked hard. It was a lot of running. I signed up originally to be goalie just because I thought it didn't include a ton of running, and then nope, it still included running. So be thinking about the experiences that you've had and what types of skills those can translate to in a job setting. So if you have, constantly mowed your neighbor's lawn, whether it's been paid or unpaid, do you babysit a lot? Do you do dog walking for your neighbor? When you're thinking about the activities that you have in your life, you're going to really focus on pulling pieces of that and how those skill sets can be applied to future jobs. So again, time management, you have to be productive, and you have to be able to prioritize. All of these things are important because when you get into a job, you often get assignments, and then you have to give yourself the time frame of when it needs to be done by and the steps of how to do it. So we want to know maybe that you are an independent worker, but you are still great at working with teams. Again, soccer could show you that. You know what? You had to develop relationships with your teammates, and knowing that you have a lot of different personalities that come on a team and there's a high level of competitiveness. You could talk about how you always wanted to be a team player, but it also was important for you to have that internal drive to maintain your athletic eligibility and know that, if you didn't go run, but your teammates ran, you might end up slowing down. So when you're talking about ways to build your resume, think about examples like that, because you'll find when you're building your resume, this is also giving you content for interviews down the road. So if someone who is interviewing you asks a question, you're going to be able to draw from examples that you've actually used in your resume. So just for your example, you don't have to have a whole list of professional experience, but if you do, of course, list it out and talk about all the different components of your job. So the additional sections that may work within your experience or may need to be subsections, it could be volunteer experience, international experience. Again, we mentioned honors and awards, so think about if that should be down below or if it's relevant to your education. Because let's say if you are a volunteer firefighter for one of our rural communities, that could go under experience, that could go under leadership. If it is part of an education where you're actually doing coursework for it, it could also go under education. So again, it is your resume, you're designing it to really describe who you are. So when you're looking at it and you feel like maybe you need a boost in a certain section, you could put that volunteer firefighter example in a variety of categories. So you pick which one is going to show you as the strongest candidate. You'll also have various co-curricular activities and special skills that you might want to include. So we have in this example special skills, including something like QuickBooks, Microsoft Word, and Excel. We use technology so much. I mean, now everyone's basically fluent in Zoom. So there's a lot that we need to be able to do now with technology to adapt to most roles. And it's always important to just put that there, knowing that you are competent in those areas and you can pick up a device and be able to use it for whichever company you work for. A lot of companies work with different software, but maybe you're working in a more manual labor type job, or you're going to be applying for that. Those can still be important, and so you don't want to lose sight of those on your resume. Okay, so when you're thinking career readiness, just like the examples I was giving, you want to be able to identify that you can think critically and you can problem solve. You want to demonstrate that you have good written communication, and your oral communication will come in that interview, but your resume is the first thing that someone looks at in order to give you that callback. So you want to make sure that it is well written. You want to be able to identify your teamwork and collaboration style. You want to highlight digital technology that you are competent in. You want to highlight any leadership that you have. You want to actually show your professionalism in this, and that goes back to things like your email address and making sure that is professional. And you really want to show your work ethic and integrity through this. you're like, man, this is just a one piece of paper, but it says a lot about you. So last but not least, you want to show any sort of global or cultural fluency. If you are multilingual, definitely highlight that. And we want to make sure that, again, it's one piece of paper, but it's a very powerful piece of paper because it describes you and it tells your story. So with that, who else can tell your story? Well, someone who knows you. So there is something where on your resume, if you'd like, at the bottom, you can also say references available upon request. And then make sure you ask people to be your reference. So it's definitely, you don't want to have anyone get caught off guard, again, having you list them as a reference. You want to make sure that they know ahead of time that they're going to be as listed as a reference, and you want to make sure you know their title and their job responsibilities, where they work. So that typically also leads into their relation to you. So are they a school counselor and they're going to be a reference to you? You know, you can list their phone and their email, and then you can actually say, you know, school counselor have worked with for 3 years. Sometimes it's good to see how many years you've actually known the person. You can put teachers, supervisors, advisors. Any of you are involved in a local church, pastors. If you do any sort of volunteer work, those supervisors are really great. Just people who can attest to your work ethic and your skill sets as well. So the references is something that I encourage you to start compiling, because you never know in an instance when someone goes, so do you have any references I can contact? And you'll say, yes, I do. Let me go ahead and email you that list. And then you already have them set up. They're people who know you well and who know that at any time they might be called as a reference for you because you're actively looking for a job or potentially, you know, applying to a university. So with that, references are really helpful to have on hand. So now, brainstorm. I'm hoping that you have a piece of paper. I can't actually see you right now, but I'm hoping you have a piece of paper and you've been taking notes as I've been talking, because I want you to think, okay, there's leadership positions that I've held, or I've received an award or recognition in some way. You know what? I have some job experience. I have some volunteer experience, and it may not look like a traditional job that you see an adult have. That's okay. We're trying to just hone in on the skills that you have and highlight those. So what have you been involved in? That is the broad spectrum question I want you to answer right now, is what have you been involved in and what have you done? And that way you can start categorizing what would be an experience, what would maybe be under volunteer, what is going to be in your education section, what skills do you really want to highlight. If you're a really fast typer, that's great. If you are a very organized person, if you're the type of person who really does a great job with brainstorming and you like to bounce ideas off of people, you're going to be writing all of these notes down. And my friends and I, we call it a brain hurricane, actually, because we want you to just throw out all of the things that you would want to include on a resume, and don't get so stuck on the format when you're trying to come up with the content, because sometimes you just get stuck with like, okay, I have this information, where would I put it? Just write it down on a blank piece of paper. You can say soccer, volunteer firefighter, National Honor Society, babysat. I mean, just start putting those things down, and then you learn how to describe them. Those are your starting points when you're talking with your family members and your counselors on figuring out, okay, how do I describe these? So you can come back to the actual format later. Really, when you're starting to build a resume from scratch, you have to start with the content. And what's nice is when you're starting with the content and then you start building it out, it also shows you areas you may need to strengthen. So if you're looking at your resume and you're going, ooh, my GPA is a 2.9. Man, if I get it up to that 3.0, I could add that to my resume. Maybe that's the incentive you needed to increase your GPA. Or maybe you go, man, I really just haven't volunteered at all. Well, now's the time to look at it. Have you done any live webinars? I mean, this has been such a crazy time in our lives, but it has shown us just how many incredible resources there are online. So if you've done type of webinars, also a really great thing to add to your resume. So you could add it under, you know, additional sections with your skill sets. or under your profile. So if you're learning any sort of coding or database, all of that is very, very important. And we want you to put it on your resume. So again, you get to decide where to put it though. With that, I feel like I just did a marathon talking about building resumes. I want to see if you guys have questions. I tried to keep it succinct, but also I realized I went on some tangents. So
That was great. No, you hit a ton of points, but I do see a few questions in the chat box, and I also have a few prepared. So we'll start with the first question from Olivia. Can you make a separate list of references, or should they be on the same page? And I'm assuming same page means same page as your resume.
yeah, that is a great question. And it really depends on the answer. Yes. If you have a separate resume page that has your references at the bottom, you can actually say references available upon request, and then you can actually have that as a follow-up document. But if you are having a full second page, just make sure that you number your pages so that you've got your resume page 1, so you know there's a second page that has references, and you don't necessarily have to refer to them on your first page. It's just good to have them. But it also is, again, personal preference. So I say all this by saying I'm not the biggest expert, because really you're your own expert.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Another question is, how often should you update your resume? Whenever you have a new job to apply to, or more often?
Great question. Well, it's, again, personal preference. It's nice to have an updated resume, because if there's ever an, say, internal position that you want to go for and you're caught off guard where someone says, hey, do you have an updated resume? Well, then you can say, I do. But let's also think about how quickly life goes by, and you probably are accomplishing a lot more than you realize. And if you have to then try and think back to what you've accomplished, that's harder. So while you don't necessarily also have to keep your resume up to date every week, it's good to have a running log of things that you're involved in. So again, back to my whole brain hurricane and then actual resume itself. Honestly, I keep documents that talk about the different work projects that I'm doing, because sometimes I end up getting thrust into positions or responsibilities just because I realize, oh, no one else is doing it, so it's not getting done. Okay, I'm going to do it. And then all of a sudden I realize, oh, that's a really great resume builder. So I'll put it in my little brain hurricane, and then, time comes, I can customize the resume for the job that I need to apply for. Or in this case, I've been at NCU now 9 years. So I haven't necessarily been applying for jobs, but I've been put up for local awards, and it's been nice to say, oh, I do have a resume. Here you go. Thank you. I appreciate the consideration. And so, whether you're looking for scholarships, honestly, this is a really great, I'm thinking from the higher education hat that I wear. This is a really great exercise for when you are applying for scholarships, because when you're building your resume, when you're doing that brain hurricane of all the things that you've been involved in, it helps you in your essay prompts and how to describe yourself to say, pick me for the scholarship. So while right now you're in high school, you're probably starting to accomplish a lot, and you may be continually adding it to your resume. You could also just keep that brain hurricane document going on, and that way it can customize it for the scholarships or jobs that you're looking for.
That's great. What if my resume is over 1 page? What should I eliminate or edit first to try to get it down?
Well, if you have reiterated yourself, that's one way to make it more succinct. So take out anything that seems redundant. I mentioned earlier that sometimes that's what it feels like. You're saying, your skills and then your special skills, and your profile can identify really who you are and your personality, and then you say it again down here. Well, maybe you don't need that specific profile section. Can you, maybe you have to be your editor and really look at what is the most important information to give. There were times that I've had resumes that are longer than a page, and while not I'm discounting the person because of it, I see that you're involved in a lot, but there are a lot of times other ways for you to describe those things that you've been involved in. Another part of the career development talk that our director, Angela, does is about cover letters, and oftentimes that aren't on your resume can then be included in a cover letter, which really, again, describes in more detail your experience and your desire for the job. So when you're looking at what you've got, you need on your resume, make sure it has your name, your contact information, your basic skills, your education, and your overall experience. But I have a feeling it's going to be your experience that you've probably elaborated on. Without seeing your resume, it's really hard to give specific feedback.
Mhm.
But if your experience section is especially long, maybe in a cover letter, you can actually tie in some of your experience and how it applies to the job directly. And you can just make those distinct sentences a little more phrases than full sentences.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you give an example of some good verbs? You mentioned earlier that it's important to use strong action words, but an
Oh,
example would be really helpful.
yes. Okay. Now I'm trying to think of back to where that resume was. Well, so a verb is, an action word. So if I'm going to go back to my own personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
I was a tour guide, and the tour guide position, I don't want to just say like I gave tours.
Right.
If I want to expand on that, I could say provided historical knowledge on campus history, or well, I just said history twice. Man, you guys are really catching off guard right now. This is good. um, provided campus information, historical knowledge. Yeah, you guys really stumped me on this one. I don't think I had enough coffee for the afternoon.
No, that's totally fine. I've always found too that it's really helpful when filling in the kind of the description under work experience or volunteer experience. That phrasing is so unlike any other writing you do in life, where you're eliminating personal pronouns and focusing really hard on verb tense. And so I've found it helpful sometimes to use those pronouns and then to go back and take them out and then look for consistent verb tense. Because it feels very foreign to write like that.
It does. And see, because right now, as I'm speaking about my personal history, I'm having a hard time doing exactly what I've just told you to
Right.
do. So putting it to paper, I'm telling you, that helps immensely because then you can, there is this lovely thing called Google.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you've got word searches and those sorts of things. So when you are looking for verbs as well as like adjectives to describe who you are without using like I am this.
Right.
It's important to make sure that when you've done those like word replacements, because you're maybe trying to use a bigger word and sounds a little more sophisticated, that you use the right word. Another reason to have someone edit it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that is a really great question, and I'm sorry that I was struggling to answer it a little.
No, you're totally fine. How far back should I go on my resume in terms of years, like 2, 4, or 6?
That is also a great question and personal preference, but I would say if you're in high school, you don't necessarily need to go into your middle school experiences.
Right.
So within high school, I would stay within, the 1 to 4 years that you're involved, because even once you get into college, you'll then list maybe the top things that you accomplished in high school, such as like an honors, and you may eliminate saying like, oh, I took AP classes, but maybe you graduated with honors, or you were captain of a club or sports team. Those sorts of things are really important because they do show leadership and initiative. But as you continue to gain other experience, you'll see which ones kind of float to the top and go, you know what, this is more relevant now than it was back then. Or vice versa. It was more relevant then, and this is more relevant now. So when you're in high school, stay within high school. When you get into college, you can definitely reference high school, but you're already starting to build more experience in college. And so, now as a working professional, while I can still reference my college years, I've been in the working force for 9 years. And so I really focus on my education in college, but I don't actually focus on all of my experiences in college because I have 10 plus, almost 10 years in the working force.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a scenario that that I could run by you.
Okay.
So let's say I apply for a job and I call my reference to let them know, hi, hey, it's me. I just applied for this job. Can I list you as a reference? So first phrase it as a question. They say yes. Time goes by, you don't get that job. And then 3 months later, you apply for another job, a different job. should you call that reference again, or should you just list them and they'll get a call, but it's going to be 3 months later than they were expecting?
Definitely call them, because they've got a lot of other things going on in life, and they may have forgotten that you listed them as a reference before. So you want to call them again, especially if it's for a different position, because if they answer and say, oh yeah, so listed me as a reference, great, so this is for this job, and they go, no, actually it's for a different job. So playing again scenarios, always call them. It's really important, and it doesn't take too long to pick up a phone and say, hey, I'm applying for another job and I'm using your reference again. Or, if you feel like it's been long enough, let's say it's been longer than 3 months, double check that they're still the best reference. What if, it's someone who you really haven't kept in touch with? You may actually need to update your references as well.
That's a great point. So I have one more question, but I do want to put out a last call. If there's anybody listening in that has any more questions, go ahead and submit them now. And so my last question for you, Cassia, is what are your top 3 tips for making a great first impression on paper?
Ooh, 3. I only get 3.
I know.
Well, okay. Number 1 tip is to tell your story. That's the biggest thing. You want your resume to tell who you are, and don't be ashamed of who you are. If you feel like you don't have enough to put on there, it's okay. You are starting somewhere, and the best thing about it is that you can actually then fill in your resume now that you've built it with more things as you accomplish them. And so, yeah, number 1 tip is to make sure that it tells who you are as a person. It shouldn't be, your parent's voice. It shouldn't be your counselor's voice. It really does need to demonstrate who you are. It's helpful to have their perspective, so that way it really translates properly, but I want to make sure it just tells who you are. So that's tip number 1, tell your story. Tip number 2, look at your format and make sure it's consistent. You want it to be easily read. That is the biggest thing, because if I see a resume that it has so many different types of fonts, or it has different colors, or it just looks unprofessional. So you really want to maintain a good format for your resume, because I'm going to look at it before I start reading at it, and your first impression is just that initial glance. And the third is, I've reiterated this quite a bit, to make sure that someone proofreads. I want to make sure, whether it's spelling, the use of those verbs that I just for some reason could not find, and adjectives, and all of the things that you are writing about yourself, make sure they come across clear and in the proper way. But you also want to make sure your contact information is correct, because if you accidentally make a typo on your email, you might never hear back from that job, if email is their primary form of communication. So I guess really it comes down to making sure it highlights you, that your format is easy to read, and that you've proofread it, so that way you really come across as a great, upcoming leader and professional.
That's absolutely true. And make sure your voicemail box is clear and open and available.
And just set up.
True.
So as an admissions counselor, I can't tell you how many times I call students, and voicemail's just not set up. And I don't mind texting. If hiring, I'm not just going to text someone. I want to talk to them. So voicemail. Good tip.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Alrighty, everyone. Well, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. This was just jam-packed with info, so I'm really grateful for your time.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, tune in next Wednesday for a webinar on job searching here in Lane County. We'll be joined by Laura Vinson with the county government. So thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.